Welcome, traveller, to this quiet space, a sanctuary not of stone and soil this time, but of salt, silence, and the endless rhythmic breathing of the tides. You have found your way here, to the edge of the known world, to the shoreline where the certainty of the land meets the eternal mystery of the deep. Tonight we are not looking up at the towering cathedrals of our cities, nor are we digging into the clay of the plains. Tonight we are going to submerge. We are going to let the waters rise around us, letting the noise of the modern surface fade away into the muffled blue stillness of the abyss. There is nothing for you to do now but to breathe, to let your mind drift like a vessel cut loose from its anchor, and to journey with me into the darkness beneath the waves. We are going to explore the enigmas that lie waiting on the ocean floor, the questions that are written not in ink, but in coral and silt. Tonight, we ask a simple, gentle question. Is the history of humanity found on the land, or is it waiting, silent and preserved beneath the sea? We are told a story, a dry and terrestrial story, about the rise of civilization. The official narrative, the one written in our textbooks and displayed in our museums, tells us that human history is a phenomenon of the earth. We are told that civilization began in the Fertile Crescents, in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, the Nile, and the Indus, roughly 6,000 years ago. We are told that before this time, for tens of thousands of years, humanity existed in a state of primitive simplicity, small bands of hunter-gatherers roaming the wild, unshaped landscape, leaving no trace but a few arrowheads and the ashes of their campfires. We are taught that the ocean has always been a barrier, a dangerous edge, a void where history stops. The map of the ancient world, as we know it, is a map of the land. The blue spaces are empty. They are the here-be monsters of our understanding, the blank canvas against which the story of our progress is painted. We accept this. We build our cities on the coast. We gaze out at the horizon, and we believe that what lies beneath the surface is a world of nature, of biology, but not of history. And yet, as we drift in this quiet space of contemplation, we must remember a simple geological fact that the official historians often gloss over. The world we live in today is not the world that existed for the vast majority of human existence. We are living in a flooded world. We are told that, around 12,000 years ago, the last great ice age came to a sudden and catastrophic end. The massive ice sheets that covered the northern hemispheres, miles thick, melted rapidly. The global sea levels rose not by inches, but by hundreds of feet. This is a fact accepted by geology, but its implications for history are often ignored. If humanity has always lived as we do now, clustering around the coastlines, building our greatest settlements by the bountiful sea, then the logic of the rising waters leads to a profound realization. The cradles of civilization we study today, Sumer, Egypt, Harappa, may not be the beginning. They may be the refugees. They may be the survivors who retreated inland, the high ground settlements that survived the deluge, the true cradles, the coastal capitals of the ancient world, the cities of the Golden Age, would currently be sitting exactly where we refuse to look, hundreds of feet beneath the waves on the continental shelves that were once dry land. Let us test this hypothesis. Let us drift away from the safety of the shore and descend into the blue twilight. Our journey begins in the Far East, off the remote southernmost islands of Japan. We are travelling to the waters of Yonaguni. Here, in the 1980s, a diver looking for hammerhead sharks stumbled upon something that should not exist. He did not find a coral reef. He did not find a random pile of rocks. He found a landscape of sharp, imposing geometry. As we swim closer in our minds, the murky blue clears, and the monument of Yonaguni looms out of the gloom. It is a massive, monolithic structure, hundreds of feet long, composed of sandstone and mudstone. but it is the shape that stops the heart. We see massive flat terraces stacked with the precision of a ziggurat. We see perfectly straight edges, sharp 90-degree angles that cut through the water like a knife. We see what appear to be grand staircases leading up to wide ceremonial plazas. We see two huge pillars standing like sentinels, and we see a loop road that encircles the base of the structure. The official story, the one rushed out by geologists and skeptics to protect the timeline, is that Yonaguni is a natural formation. We are told that the ocean currents and the tectonic activity of the region simply broke the rock in a way that looks artificial. They tell us that nature, given enough time, can create straight lines and flat surfaces. And perhaps, in isolation, a single straight line might be an accident of geology. But let us use our quiet, persistent logic. Nature is the architect of chaos, of curves, of erosion. Nature does not build wide, flat terraces with level floors. Nature does not cut precise drainage channels. Nature does not carve distinct animal-like shapes. Some divers describe a massive turtle, others a bird, into the rock face. Nature does not create a loop road with a retaining wall. To look at Yonaguni and call it natural requires a suspension of disbelief far greater than accepting it is man-made. It is like looking at Mount Rushmore and claiming the wind carved the faces of the presidents. It is a desperate attempt to fit an impossible artifact into a comfortable theory. But why is the establishment so desperate to deny the artificiality of Yonaguni? Why not simply admit it is a ruin? The answer lies in the timeline. It lies in the depth. For Yonaguni to have been carved by human hands, it had to be above water. And for it to be above water, based on the known sea level curves of the last ice age, we have to go back at least 10,000 to 12,000 years. This pushes the construction date back to the very end of the ice age, to a time when, according to our textbooks, humans were primitive nomads who had not yet invented the wheel, let alone agriculture or masonry. If Yonaguni is a city or a temple, then the entire timeline of human civilization is wrong. It means that 10,000 years ago, there was a civilization capable of moving megatons of stone, of planning massive architectural projects, and of executing them with a geometry that rivals the pyramids. It means that while we are told our ancestors were chasing mammoths with spears, someone somewhere was building a metropolis that would later be swallowed by the rising sea. Yonaguni is not just a rock. It is a clock that has stopped, freezing a moment in time that we are not supposed to know existed. As we float above these silent, sharp-edged terraces, we feel the weight of the implications. If this was built 12,000 years ago, it was likely not built by the primitive people described in our history books. It speaks of a lost chapter, a chapter zero of human history. And the scary thought is not just that it exists, but that it was lost so completely. The water rose, and the memory of this place was washed away. How many other Yonagunis are there? We have explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. The continental shelves, those vast submerged plateaus that surround our continents, are a territory the size of North America and Europe combined. And yet, we treat them as empty space. We assume that because we do not see the ruins from the surface, they are not there. But Yonaguni reminds us that the ocean is not empty. It is a museum. It is a vast, silent archive of the world that came before the flood. The skeptics will tell you that the rock of Yonaguni is alive, that it shifts and cracks. They will use complex geological terms to explain away the stairs and the arches. But there is one feature that defies even the most creative geological excuse. In the underwater ruins, divers have found two round holes, perfectly circular, carved side by side into the rock terrace. They are colloquially known as the pillar holes. They are deep, they are vertical, and they are cylindrical. Nature does not drill perfect cylinders into stone. Nature does not place them equidistant from each other on a flat platform. These are clearly post holes, sockets designed to hold wooden pillars that would have supported a roof or a superstructure that has long since rotted away. This simple, humble detail, a hole in a rock, shatters the natural formation theory. It proves that people were here. It proves they built, they lived, and they looked out over a landscape that was not an ocean, but a valley. So we are left with the first piece of our submerged puzzle, a massive megalithic complex off the coast of Japan, submerged by the rising tides of the Ice Age, built by a civilization that had the technology to cut stone on a massive scale, a civilization that official history says could not have existed. But Yonaguni is just the outlier, the rugged, mysterious fortress of the East. As we continue our drift through the currents of time and water, we must turn our gaze to the west. We must travel to the cradle of what we think is the oldest civilization, to the Mediterranean, to the sands of Egypt. Here the mystery takes a different shape. Here we are not dealing with ambiguous rocks that might be natural. Here we are dealing with a myth that was proven true, a city of impossible wealth and statues that was swallowed whole, not by the slow rise of the Ice Age, but by a sudden, violent liquefaction of the earth itself. We are travelling to the lost city of Thonis Herakleion. For centuries, Herakleion was a ghost story. It appeared in the texts of ancient Greek historians, a city of immense wealth, the port of entry to Egypt, the place where Heracles himself first set foot on Egyptian soil. It was spoken of as a jewel, a place of grand temples and busy harbours, but no ruin was ever found on the land. By the 19th century, historians had dismissed it as a fable, a poetic invention of the Greeks, or perhaps a confusion with other cities. It was erased from the map, relegated to the realm of Atlantis and Camelot. It simply did not exist. The desert sands revealed nothing. The maps showed nothing. The historians closed the book. But the historians were looking in the wrong place. They were looking at the land, clinging to the bias that history is a dry affair. It was not until the year 2000 that a French archaeologist, trusting the ancient texts more than the modern skeptics, began to scan the seabed of Abukir Bay, miles off the coast. And there, emerging from the gloom of the silt-laden water, a face looked back at him. It was not a rock. It was a face of pink granite, colossal, serene, and perfectly preserved. He had found Herakleion. It was not a myth. It was a crime scene. It was a city that had been paused, frozen in the moment of its death, and hidden beneath the blanket of the sea for over 1,000 years. As we descend towards Herakleion in our minds, the atmosphere changes. Yonaguni was stark, ancient, and abstract. Herakleion is intimate, detailed, and hauntingly human. We see colossal statues, nearly 20 feet tall, standing upright on the ocean floor, surrounded by schools of fish. We see the statue of Hapi, the god of the Nile, holding a tray of offerings, his expression one of eternal calm, despite the catastrophe that brought him here. We see sphinxes, dozens of them, their lion bodies resting in the sand. We see 64 ancient shipwrecks, a naval graveyard of immense proportions, lying in the harbour where the disaster struck. We see gold coins, jewellery, and ritual vessels scattered across the seabed, like the aftermath of a party that ended in tragedy. The official story of Herakleion is that it succumbed to soil liquefaction, a combination of earthquakes and the sheer weight of the monumental stone buildings caused the clay beneath the delta to turn to liquid, and the entire city, in a moment of terrifying violence, simply slid into the sea. It is a plausible geological explanation, But as we drift among the statues, we must ask the deeper question. How many other myths are simply cities we have not yet looked for underwater? Heraklion was considered a fairy tale until the moment the diver touched the stone. It teaches us a lesson in humility. It tells us that the map is not finished. It tells us that the ocean is a hiding place, a repository where the cities of the past are kept safe from the erosion of the wind and the theft of man, waiting for us to develop the technology and the open-mindedness to find them. But Heraklion, despite its beauty, fits somewhat comfortably into the timeline. It is Greek, it is Egyptian, it is dated to a time we understand, it is a casualty of catastrophe, but not necessarily an anomaly of time. To find the true anomalies, the ones that break the timeline like Yonaguni, we must go deeper. We must go to places where the city planning itself defies the logic of the Stone Age. We must travel to Greece, but not to the Athens of the history books. We must go underwater, off the coast of Laconia, to a place called Pavlopetri. Here we find something that should not be. We find a fully planned suburban city with streets, courtyards and complex plumbing systems, resting quietly just a few metres beneath the waves. And the date assigned to it pushes the boundaries of what we think was possible for the primitive people of the Bronze Age. Pavlopetri is not a collection of huts. It is a grid. As we float over it, looking down through the crystal clear waters of the Aegean, we see the outline of a sophisticated society. We see two-storey houses. We see gardens. We see a complex drainage system that speaks of advanced urban planning. We see a cemetery with chamber tombs cut neatly into the rock. This is not a village. It is a town, a centre of commerce and textile industry. And it is at least 5,000 years old. It predates the glory of classical Greece by millennia. It sits there, submerged, a silent testament to a time when the coastlines were different, when the people we call ancients were already living in complex, ordered and technologically capable societies that were eventually defeated not by war, but by the water. These three sites, Yonaguni, Heraklion, Pavlopetri, are just the beginning. They are the cracks in the dam of official history. They show us that the ocean is not a barrier to civilization, but a graveyard of it. They force us to question the linear story of progress. If Yonaguni is truly 12,000 years old, then civilization did not begin in Sumer 6,000 years ago. It means civilization was restarted 6,000 years ago, after a great cataclysm that swallowed the previous world. It means that the history we learn in school is merely the history of the survivors, the history of the refugees who scrambled to higher ground as the oceans rose and swallowed their greatest achievements. We are the descendants of the hill people, living in ignorance of the golden cities that lie, silent and dreaming, beneath the keel of our ships. As we continue to float in this suspension of blue silence, drifting further away from the sun-drenched surface and deeper into the forgotten archives of the ocean, we must allow our minds to fully grasp the magnitude of the landscape we have lost. We often think of the map of the world as a fixed thing, a permanent arrangement of continents and oceans that has remained static for all of human history. But this is an illusion, a trick of the short memory of our species. The reality is that the map we know is merely a snapshot of a flooded world, a world in the aftermath of a deluge. To understand the true probability of finding a lost civilization underwater, we must look at the sheer scale of the land that vanished. When the great ice sheets of the last glacial maximum began to melt, roughly 14,000 to 10,000 years ago, the geography of the planet underwent a violence of change that is difficult for us to comprehend. We are not talking about the loss of a few islands or the erosion of a beach. We are talking about the submersion of a landmass equivalent in size to Europe and China combined. Let that sink in. An area of land the size of 2 continents was swallowed by the sea in a geological blink of an eye. And this was not just any land. This was the best land. This was the coastal lowlands, the fertile deltas, the land bridges that connected continents, the most temperate and resource-rich environments on the planet. If we use the simple, undeniable logic of human behaviour, we know that humans have always flocked to the coast. We are a species of the water's edge. We build our greatest cities where the rivers meet the sea, where trade is easy, where food is abundant, and where the climate is mild. Today, the vast majority of our global population lives within a few dozen miles of the ocean. Why would our ancestors have been any different? If a sophisticated, organised human civilization existed during the Ice Age, it would not have been huddled in the cold, rocky interiors where we dig for their remains today. It would have been thriving on those very coastal plains that are now hundreds of feet underwater. The implications of this are staggering. It means that what we call archaeology is largely the study of the backwoods, the study of the refugees who lived in the highlands. We are trying to reconstruct the history of humanity by looking at the campsites of the hunters who lived in the mountains, while the true capitals, the centres of trade and innovation, the New Yorks and Londons of the ancient world, were drowned and erased from the record entirely. We are judging the capacity of our ancestors by their poorest, most remote settlements, simply because those are the only ones left dry. The official history books tell us that civilization suddenly sprang up out of nowhere in Mesopotamia and Egypt around 3000 BC, fully formed, with writing, architecture and law. They call it a spark. But what if it wasn't a spark? What if it was a restart? What if the sudden appearance of Sumer and Egypt was simply the moment the survivors of the flood finally regrouped, moved inland, and began to rebuild what they had lost, carrying with them the fading memories of the great coastal cities that were now gone forever? To see the evidence of this, to see the remnants of these drowned memories, we must travel across the globe, away from the Mediterranean and the Pacific to the warm, enigmatic waters of the Indian Ocean. Here, the myths of a great flood are not just stories, they are the foundation of the culture. In India, the ancient texts speak of the first Sangam, a legendary assembly of poets and scholars that was held in a great city far to the south of the current coastline, a land called Kumari Kandam. The texts say this land was swallowed by the sea. For centuries, Western historians dismissed Kumari Kandam as pure fantasy, a Tamil version of Atlantis, a poetic exaggeration. But the ocean, in its own terrifying way, sometimes chooses to reveal the truth. On December 26, 2004, one of the greatest tragedies of the modern era occurred. The Indian Ocean tsunami struck the coast of Tamil Nadu. But in the moments before the devastating wave hit, something miraculous happened at the ancient town of Mahabalipuram. As the water recoiled, pulled back by the approaching tsunami, the seafloor was laid bare for the first time in thousands of years. And there, witnessed by hundreds of terrified onlookers, the myth became reality. As the water receded, it revealed a long, straight row of massive stones. It revealed the remains of structures that had been hidden beneath the waves for centuries. The locals had always told stories of the 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram. They claimed that the famous Shore Temple, which stands alone on the cliff today, was just the last survivor of a complex of 7 magnificent temples, 6 of which had been taken by the gods of the sea because they were too beautiful. The experts called it folklore. But when the water pulled back, the truth was exposed. After the tsunami, divers and archaeologists went into the water. They found walls. They found falling masonry. They found a massive granite lion, carved in the distinct Pallava style, sitting on the seabed, guarding a temple that was no longer there. They found that the folklore was not a story, it was a witness testimony, passed down through generations, preserving the memory of a geological event that science had forgotten. But Mahabalipuram is relatively young, perhaps submerged only 1,000 years ago. To find the true challenges to the timeline, we must go deeper and older to the Gulf of Kamhat on the northwest coast of India. Here lies the modern city of Dwarka, a place sacred to Lord Krishna. In the ancient Hindu texts, the Mahabharata, Dwarka is described as a golden city, a fortress of immense wealth and power, built on reclaimed land. The texts describe it in vivid detail, speaking of its 900,000 palaces, its wide boulevards, and its fortified walls. And then the texts describe its end. They say that upon the departure of Krishna, the ocean rose up and submerged the city, erasing it from the earth. Once again, the modern historians smiled and called it a metaphor. They said Dwarka was a legend, a spiritual allegory for the soul, not a real place of brick and mortar. But in 2001, oceanographers from the National Institute of Ocean Technology were scanning the pollution levels in the Gulf of Kamhat. They were not looking for ruins, they were looking for trash. But their sonar picked up something that looked suspiciously like geometry. They sent down dredgers, and what they pulled up sent a shockwave through the archaeological world, a shockwave that was quickly stifled and ignored by the mainstream. They found a vast submerged city. It was 5 miles long and 2 miles wide. The sonar images revealed the clear, undeniable outlines of plinths, walls, drainage systems, and a great rectangular bath. This was not a village, it was a metropolis, and it was sitting 120 feet underwater. The depth alone is a problem for the official timeline. For a city to be built at that depth, it had to be constructed when the sea level was much lower, meaning, again, at the end of the Ice Age, roughly 9,000 to 12,000 years ago. But the physical evidence that came up from the bottom was even more problematic. The dredgers recovered artefacts, semi-precious stones, beads, broken pottery, and, most crucially, a piece of wood. This piece of carbonized wood was sent to 2 separate laboratories for dating. The results came back with a date that was impossible according to the textbooks, 9,500 years old. If this date is correct, and if the wood is indeed part of the city's foundation, then Dwarka is older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than China. It would mean that civilization in India did not begin 4,000 years ago, as the textbooks say, but was fully flourishing nearly 10,000 years ago, at the very time when the ice was melting and the world was changing. The existence of Dwarka completely rewrites the story of human development. It suggests that the myth of the Golden Age, the universal story found in every culture of a time before the flood, when humanity was great and powerful, is not a myth at all. It is a history. It is the memory of these lost coastal megalopolises. When we look at Dwarka, we are looking at the chapter 1 that was torn out of the book. We are seeing a city that managed to thrive, perhaps for thousands of years, before the rising waters finally claimed it. And the description in the Mahabharata of the city being swallowed by the ocean is not a poetic flourish. It is a journalistic report of a sea level rise event, or perhaps a massive tsunami caused by the collapsing ice shelves thousands of miles away. The ancient writers were telling us the truth. We simply stopped listening because we thought we knew better. We thought the sea was empty. As we float in the currents above the Gulf of Kamhat, imagining the golden spires of Dwarka shining beneath the silt, we must ask ourselves, why is this not headline news? Why are the history books not being rewritten? The answer is the inertia of the establishment. To accept Dwarka is to break the model. If Dwarka existed 9,500 years ago, then the model of linear progress from primitive hunter-gatherer to sophisticated city builder is broken. It implies a cycle. It implies that humanity rises to great heights, builds wonders, and then is smashed back down to zero by the forces of the planet, forced to start over, remembering the past only as legends of gods and golden cities. It is a terrifying thought because it means it could happen again. But it is also a liberating thought. It means our past is far deeper, richer, and more mysterious than the short, dry timeline we are fed in school. We leave the warm waters of India now, carrying with us the realization that the myths of the East, Kumari Kandam, the Seven Pagodas, the Golden City of Dwarka, are likely maps to real places. But the mystery of the sunken world is not confined to the Indian Ocean. It is global. The same rising waters that swallowed Dwarka also inundated the vast continental shelves of the Americas, of Europe, and of the Atlantic. And it is there in the West that the most famous, the most controversial, and the most enduring legend of all resides. A legend that has haunted the human imagination for 2,000 years. As we turn our mental compass toward the setting sun, toward the deep, cold waters of the Atlantic and the Caribbean, we prepare to confront the ultimate question of submerged history. We prepare to ask if the greatest of all lost civilizations, the one that has become a synonym for impossible, might actually be waiting for us in the dark. We are moving towards the shadow of Atlantis, not as a magical city of flying machines, but as a real, tangible, and logical victim of the same rising seas that took Dwarka. The water is getting deeper now, the silence is getting heavier, and the ruins are getting stranger. We drift now, carried by the deep, slow currents of the Gulf Stream, moving away from the ancient, tragic shores of India, and across the vast expanse of the planetary ocean. We are heading west, following the sun toward the turquoise crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean and the Atlantic. This is a place of beauty, of bright sun and white sands, a place we associate with paradise. But beneath this veneer of vacation tranquility lies one of the most profound and fiercely debated enigmas in the history of archaeology. We are approaching the shallow waters off the coast of North Bimini in the Bahamas. It is here, in just 15 to 20 feet of water, that the ocean floor presents us with a structure so suggestive, so undeniably organised, that it has become the battleground for the very soul of history. We are looking at the Bimini Road, discovered in 1968, exactly as predicted by the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce decades earlier, a coincidence that sends a shiver through even the most sceptical mind. The Bimini Road is a formation of limestone blocks running roughly parallel to the shore. As we float above it, looking down through the lens of the crystal water, the impression is immediate and striking. We see a neat, orderly arrangement of massive rectangular stones, some up to 15 feet in length, laid out in a straight line that stretches for nearly half a mile before curving at the end in a distinct, purposeful J shape. To the unconditioned eye, to the eye of a child or a poet, this is a road, or a wall, or a breakwater. It is a construction. It speaks of intent. It speaks of engineering. It speaks of a time when this shallow shelf was dry land, a bustling harbour where ships from a forgotten world might have docked. However, the official voice of geology is quick to intervene. They tell us to look away. They tell us that the Bimini Road is nothing more than beach rock, a natural phenomenon where limestone fractures in rectangular patterns due to the stresses of drying and settling. They show us diagrams of natural cleavage planes. They assure us that nature, in her infinite randomness, just happened to create a half-mile-long line of blocks that look exactly like a paved street. And to be fair, beach rock does exist. Nature does create patterns. But let us swim closer. Let us descend to the seabed. and apply our quiet, persistent logic to the details that the textbooks ignore. When we look at the stones of the Bimini Road, we do not just see fractured bedrock. We see distinct, separate blocks that appear to have been set in place. Expeditions that have dared to dig beneath the stones have found things that beach rock simply cannot explain. They have found that some of these massive blocks are not resting on the bedrock, but are resting on other stones. They are stacked. More damningly, researchers have found what appear to be shims, smaller, wedge-shaped stones deliberately placed under the larger blocks to level them. Nature does not shim. Nature does not use levelling wedges. Nature does not stack multi-ton blocks in balanced layers to create a flat surface. Furthermore, underneath some of these stones, explorers have claimed to find evidence of distinct tool marks and even materials that resemble ancient cement. The beach rock explanation begins to feel like a desperate shield, a way to ward off the terrifying implication that a sophisticated megalithic culture was active here in the Americas, thousands of years before Columbus, thousands of years before the Maya were supposed to have risen. To understand why a road would be here underwater, we must once again look at the map of the Ice Age. We must drain the water in our minds. If we lower the sea level by 300 feet, the level it was during the last glacial maximum, the Bahamas are not a scattering of small islands. The Great Bahama Bank, the vast shallow plateau upon which these islands sit, becomes a massive landmass. It becomes a great island, perhaps the size of Cuba, filled with lagoons, estuaries and resources. It would have been a paradise, a perfect home for a maritime civilization. In this context, the Bimini Road ceases to be a mystery and becomes a logical necessity. It is situated exactly where a harbour would need to be on that ancient coastline. The J shape is the classic shape of a breakwater, designed to protect a harbour from the rough waves of the open ocean. We are likely looking at the ruins of a port that served a kingdom that was drowned when the glaciers melted, and the Great Bahama Bank was submerged, turning a vast island into a shoal of scattered cays. The existence of such a civilization in the Atlantic brings us inevitably to the shadow of Atlantis. For centuries, serious historians have treated Plato's account of Atlantis as a moral fable, a fiction invented to teach philosophy. They mock the idea of a lost continent, and from a geological standpoint, they are right. There is no missing continent in the middle of the deep Atlantic that simply sank. Tectonic plates don't work that way. But Plato didn't have modern geological terms. He described a great maritime power situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, which controlled many islands and parts of the continent. If we look at the sunken landmasses of the Azores, the Canaries, and the Great Bahama Bank during the Ice Age, we see exactly that, a chain of massive habitable islands that would have allowed a seafaring culture to dominate the ocean. Atlantis may not be a single chunk of land that vanished. It may be the memory of this global maritime network that lived on the coasts and the islands of the Ice Age Atlantic, a network that was simultaneously shattered and drowned when the ocean level rose 400 feet. The road at Bimini is not the only anomaly in these waters. The Caribbean is full of whispers. There are stories of pilots flying over the waters off Cuba and seeing the outlines of city grids and pyramids in the deep water. In 2001, a team using advanced side-scan sonar off the Guanahaca-Bibes Peninsula in Cuba released images that showed distinct symmetrical geometric structures covering an area of 2 square kilometres at a depth of over 2,000 feet. They described pyramids, roads and buildings. The mainstream media briefly lit up with the news of a lost city, and then silence. The funding dried up. The follow-up expeditions were cancelled. The story was buried. Why? Why is there such a profound lack of curiosity? Why do we spend billions exploring Mars, yet refuse to send a camera down to investigate a sonar anomaly in our own ocean? The answer, perhaps, is fear. Fear of what we might find. Fear that the discovery of a technologically advanced city sitting 2,000 feet underwater would shatter the comfortable narrative of our history. It would mean that the primitive past is a lie. It would mean that we are not the first. It would mean that civilization is fragile, that it can be wiped out by the planet in a single day, leaving nothing but silent stones in the darkness. The establishment prefers the safety of the hunter-gatherer theory. It is safe. It is linear. It puts us at the pinnacle of evolution. But the silence of the Caribbean deeps does not care about our theories. The structures are there, whether we admit it or not. As we leave the warm, shallow mysteries of the Caribbean and drift eastward, into the deeper, colder and more volatile waters of the mid-Atlantic, the mystery deepens. We approach the Azores, a cluster of 9 volcanic islands that sit atop the mid-Atlantic ridge, the very seam of the world where the Earth pulls apart. These islands are the peaks of immense underwater mountains. During the Ice Age, this archipelago was larger, a significant stepping stone between the worlds. And here too, the silence has been broken. In recent years, reports have emerged from local sailors and amateur hydrographers of a massive underwater pyramid located between the islands of São Miguel and Terceira. They claim it is perfectly oriented to the cardinal points, like the Great Pyramid of Giza, and that it stands almost 200 feet tall. The Portuguese Navy, we are told, is investigating. And then the familiar silence descends. Is it a digital error, a sonar glitch, or is it another piece of the puzzle? If we allow ourselves to connect the dots, from the terraces of Yonaguni in the Pacific, to the submerged port of Dwarka in the Indian Ocean, to the Bimini Road and the Cuban ruins in the Caribbean, to the pyramids of the Azores, a picture begins to form. It is not a picture of isolated tribes discovering fire. It is a picture of a global interconnected web. It suggests that before the great melt, before the great reset of the Ice Age, the world was mapped, travelled and settled by a civilization that understood the ocean, a civilization that built its greatest monuments on the edge of the water. They were the masters of the coast. They were the people of the Golden Age. And when the water rose, when the ice caps collapsed and the ocean surged, their world didn't just end. It was erased. It was hidden in the one place where we cannot easily look. We are walking on the roof of their world. Our ships sail over their cathedrals. Our internet cables snake past their pyramids. We call the ocean a wilderness, but perhaps we should call it a graveyard of giants. The water protects their secrets, preserving them in a stasis of salt and pressure, safe from the vandalism of later empires, safe from the plough of the farmer, safe from the curiosity of the tourist. They wait. They wait for the day when we stop looking at the ground and start looking at the blue map. But the ocean is not the only place where the evidence of this lost timeline hides. Sometimes the evidence is not underwater, but merely underground, buried by the same cataclysms, or perhaps by the deliberate hand of time. As we prepare to leave the Atlantic, we must remember that the flood was not just water, it was chaos, it was mud, it was upheaval, and sometimes the strangest technologies of the ancients are found not in the ruins of their cities, but in the inexplicable artifacts they left behind, artifacts that suggest a knowledge of physics and energy that rivals our own. We are about to turn our gaze from the macro, the cities, the roads, the pyramids, to the micro. We are going to look at the impossible objects that have been pulled from the earth and the sea, the gears, the batteries, the maps that show the world before the ice. We are going to ask, If they had cities, did they also have machines? The silence of the deep Atlantic surrounds us now, a heavy, crushing darkness. But in our minds, we can see the grid. We can see the lines connecting Bimini to the Azores to Heracleion, Heracleion to Dwarka, Dwarka to Yonaguni. It is a single belt, a ring of civilization that encircled the ancient equator. We have been told we are alone in history, but the ghosts of the deep are crowding around us, whispering a different story, a story of a world that was full, a story of a world that was connected, a story of a world that drowned. And as we drift here, suspended in the void, we realise that the water is not just a barrier, it is a mirror. And if we look closely enough, we might just see ourselves reflected in the ruins of the past. We might see that our modern global civilization is not a new invention, but a recurrence, a repetition of a cycle that has played out before and ended in the salt. The question is not, did they exist? The question is, why did they fall? And will we share their fate? The current shifts. The water grows colder. We are moving on. We are leaving the sunken roads and the underwater pyramids behind, but we are carrying the weight of their existence with us. The journey is not over. The ocean has more to tell us. But for now, we rest in the knowledge that the map is incomplete, that the blue spaces are filled with shadows, and that the history of humanity is wet, deep, and waiting to be discovered. As we float in the deep, suspended silence of the mid-Atlantic, drifting in the wake of the invisible ships of the past, we must turn our attention to the invisible threads that connected this lost world. We have seen the static ruins, the roads, the temples, the pyramids, resting on the ocean floor like the bones of a giant. But a civilization is more than just stone. A civilization is movement. It is trade. It is the ability to navigate the vast, indifferent emptiness of the planet. If there was indeed a global maritime culture, a golden age civilization that built Dwarka in the east and Bimini in the west, they must have possessed a way to see the world. They must have had eyes that could pierce the horizon. And so our journey takes a strange turn. We are not looking for a building now. We are looking for a piece of paper, or rather the skin of a gazelle. We are looking for the Piri Reis map. This map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, is one of the most baffling documents in human history. It sits in a museum in Istanbul, a fragile fragment of the past. But it is not the map itself that disturbs the timeline. It is the source notes. Piri Reis himself admitted, with the honesty of a true scholar, that his map was not an original creation. He wrote that it was a compilation, a mosaic stitched together from 20 older maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and others, he implies, even older. He was copying copies of copies. And what these ancient source maps reveal is a geography that should not have been known to anyone in 1513, nor indeed to anyone in ancient Greece. As we drift in our mental ocean, let us unroll this parchment before us. We see the coast of South America drawn with an eerie, impossible precision. We see rivers penetrating deep into the interior, rivers that would not be explored by Europeans for decades. We see the Falkland Islands appearing in the correct latitude, but then our eyes drift south to the bottom of the map, and we see the thing that stops the breath. We see a coastline connecting to the bottom of South America. It is a detailed, rugged coast, with bays, estuaries and mountains. We are looking at Queen Maud Land. We are looking at Antarctica. But there is a terrifying difference. The Antarctica on the Piri Reis map is not a white void. It is not an ice shelf. It is land. It shows the coastline as it exists beneath the ice. The official history tells us that Antarctica was discovered in 1820. It tells us that the continent has been covered in a mile-thick sheet of ice for millions of years, and yet here is a map compiled from ancient sources that depicts the coastline with a topographical accuracy that matches the subglacial seismic surveys performed in the mid-20th century. How is this possible? There is only one logical answer, an answer that connects directly to our submerged cities. Someone had to have mapped that coastline before it was covered in ice. Someone had to have sailed those waters when Antarctica was a temperate, habitable land, perhaps at the very end of the last ice age, before the Great Freeze settled in and the oceans rose. The map is a fossil. It is a surviving document from the Library of the Lost Civilization, a testament to a time when the world was fully charted by masters of the sea, masters whose ships sailed from the tropical ports of Bimini to the green harbours of Antarctica. This realization that the ancients possessed a global, accurate view of the planet forces us to reconsider their technological capabilities. If they could map the subglacial coast of a polar continent, what other tools did they possess? We tend to think of the ancients as people of the chisel and the hammer, people of muscle and sweat. But the ocean has a way of preserving the truth that the land destroys. In 1900, off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, sponge divers discovered an ancient shipwreck. Among the beautiful marble statues and bronze vases, they found a lump of corroded bronze and wood, fused together by centuries of salt and sea. It looked like nothing. It looked like junk. But when it broke open, it revealed the internal organs of a machine that shattered our concept of history. We are speaking, of course, of the Antikythera mechanism. As we examine it in the quiet light of our contemplation, we see a complex system of 30 interlocking bronze gears, cut with the precision of a 19th century Swiss watch. We see dials. We see differential gearing, a mechanical concept that we thought wasn't invented until the Industrial Revolution. This was not a toy. It was an analog computer. It was a device designed to calculate the movements of the sun, the moon and the planets, to predict eclipses, and even to track the dates of the ancient Olympic Games. It was a portable universe, a mechanical cosmos held in a wooden box. The official story is that this is a singular work of genius, a fluke of Greek engineering from the 1st century BC. But does that make sense? Does a technology like differential gearing appear out of nowhere in a single device and then vanish for 2,000 years? Technology does not work that way. Technology is evolutionary. The Antikythera mechanism is too perfect, too refined to be a prototype. It is not the first of its kind. It is the last of its kind. It is a survivor. It suggests that the Greeks did not invent this technology, but rather they inherited it. They were using the fading knowledge of the Golden Age, copying the designs of the masters who came before. Just as the Piri Reis map is a copy of a lost source, the Antikythera mechanism is a copy of a lost machine. It is a piece of the high-technology debris left behind by the civilization that mapped Antarctica, the civilization that built the sea walls of Bimini. It proves that the ancients were not primitive. They were sophisticated engineers who understood the mathematics of the cosmos and the mechanics of the gear, knowledge that was subsequently lost when their cities drowned and their libraries rotted in the damp. This thread of lost technology and impossible navigation leads us away from the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, pulling us across the globe to the vastest, loneliest ocean of them all. We must travel to the Pacific. If there was a global maritime civilization, the Pacific would have been their greatest highway. And it is here, in the middle of nowhere, on the tiny island of Pompeii in Micronesia, that we find a ruin that defies all explanation. It is a place that feels less like a city and more like a fever dream of architecture. We are approaching Nan Madol. Nan Madol is often called the Venice of the Pacific, but that name does a disservice to its strangeness. It is a city built entirely on top of a coral reef, consisting of nearly 100 artificial islets separated by a network of canals. But it is the building material that stops the heart. The entire city, its walls, its temples, its tombs, is constructed from massive hexagonal columns of basalt rock. These are not bricks. They are logs of solid stone, some weighing up to 50 tons. They are stacked like a giant's game of Lincoln logs, forming walls that rise 25 feet above the water. The sheer scale of the construction is mind-bending. Archaeologists estimate that the site contains 250 million tons of basalt. Let us apply our quiet logic. We are on a small island in the middle of the Pacific. The quarry for these basalt columns is on the other side of the island, miles away. Between the quarry and the city lies dense, impenetrable jungle and mountainous terrain. How did a primitive island culture, with no metal tools, no pulleys, and no draft animals, move 250 million tons of stone logs across a mountain and then float them out onto a coral reef to stack them with crane-like precision? The local legends, of course, have an answer. They say the city was built by twin sorcerers, Olosopa and Olosipa, who arrived from a distant land in a great canoe. They say the sorcerers used magic to make the heavy stones fly through the air and settle into place. We smile at the word magic, but what is magic? As Arthur C. Clarke famously said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If we look at Nan Madol through the lens of our lost civilization hypothesis, the story of the sorcerers sounds less like a fairy tale and more like a distorted memory of technology. Were these sorcerers actually survivors? Were they refugees from the sunken lands of the Pacific, the mythical continent of Mu or Lemuria, who possessed the engineering knowledge, the anti-gravity or acoustic levitation technology, or simply the advanced mechanical means to move these stones? Was Nan Madol a final attempt to rebuild the glory of a lost world, constructed on the edge of the reef, looking out at the ocean that had swallowed their home? There is another detail about Nan Madol that connects it to our theme of the submerged world. The city is sinking, or rather, the ocean is rising around it. Many of the structures continue underwater, disappearing into the lagoon. Divers have reported that there are more walls, huge pillars, and even streets extending deeper into the ocean beyond the visible islets. And strange magnetic anomalies have been reported around the basalt logs, compasses spinning wildly, suggesting that the stone itself was chosen for its energetic properties. Was Nan Madol a machine? Was it a power station like the pyramids or the cathedrals we spoke of before? Was it a navigation beacon for the ships that used the Piri Reis maps? The official timeline says Nan Madol was built around 1200 AD, but the basalt logs cannot be carbon dated. Only the organic debris found between the stones can be dated. It is entirely possible, and perhaps logical, that the people of 1200 AD simply inhabited the ruins. They found this massive basalt fortress standing empty on the reef, a relic of the ancients, and they moved in, building their grass huts on top of the titanic stone foundations. They claimed the city, just as we claimed the cathedrals, but they did not build it. The scale is too vast. The engineering is too alien. Nan Madol stands as a basalt sentinel in the Pacific, a counterpart to the limestone road of Bimini in the Atlantic, proving that the mystery is global. The connection between these distant points, the map in Turkey, the machine in Greece, the basalt city in Micronesia, weaves a net around the globe. It tells us that the ocean was not a barrier, it was a bridge. It tells us that the primitive past was actually a time of high adventure, of global trade, and of advanced understanding. We are looking at the debris of a world that was as connected as our own, perhaps even more so, but connected by the currents of the sea and the wind, rather than the fibre optic cable. And the tragedy is that this connection was severed, the map was torn, the machine was broken, the city was abandoned. As we linger here in the Pacific twilight, watching the dark water lap against the impossible walls of Nan Madol, we feel the fragility of it all. We realise that knowledge is not permanent. It can be lost. We can forget how to read the maps. We can forget how to build the machines. We can forget who we are. And the ocean, in its patient, relentless way, waits to catch the pieces when they fall. The silence of Nan Madol is the silence of a library that has burned down. But the stones remain, and as long as the stones remain, the question remains. Who were the sorcerers who made the stones fly? And where did they go when the water rose? The journey is far from over. We have seen the cities, the maps, and the machines. But we have not yet touched the darkest part of the mystery. We have not yet asked the question of what exactly lies at the very bottom. What are the ultimate origins of this lost culture? And are there structures so deep, so alien, and so vast that they defy not just history, but our understanding of biology and evolution itself? We must prepare to go deeper than we have ever gone before. We must prepare to descend into the abyss, where the pressure is crushing, and where the shapes in the darkness are no longer human. We drift now from the warm sunlit mysteries of the tropics and the temperate latitudes, moving north, far north, into waters that are dark, cold, and brackish. We are leaving the realm of stone temples and coral roads to enter a place where the line between archaeology and science fiction begins to blur entirely. We are travelling to the bottom of the Baltic Sea, that shallow, narrow arm of the Atlantic that separates Scandinavia from the rest of Europe. It is here, in the gloom of the northern abyss, that a discovery was made in 2011 that refuses to fit into any box, geological, historical, or even biological. It is known simply as the Baltic Sea anomaly. The discovery began as a routine shipwreck hunt. A Swedish salvage team, known as Ocean X, was scanning the seabed with side-scan sonar, looking for crates of vintage champagne or sunken World War I vessels. What they found instead was a shadow on the monitor that stopped their hearts. It was not a ship. It was not a rock formation. It was a perfect, distinct and artificial-looking disc. It was 60 metres in diameter, the size of a jumbo jet, with rigid geometric lines and a distinct, rounded appearance that eerily resembled the fictional Millennium Falcon. But it was not just the shape that was disturbing. It was the context. Leading up to this massive disc, carved into the seabed for nearly 300 metres, was a track, a skid mark. It looked for all the world as if this colossal object had come crashing down from above, ploughing through the sediment before grinding to a halt on the ocean floor. The official explanation, rushed out by experts who had never visited the site, was glacial deposit. They suggested it was a large rock carried by ice ages ago, but rocks do not leave 300-metre skid marks that remain visible for millennia. Rocks do not have right angles, smooth curved walls, and distinct corridors and staircases carved into their interior, as the divers who later descended to the site reported. When the Ocean X team finally went down to touch the object, the mystery only deepened. They found that the stone looked scorched, as if it had been subjected to intense heat. They found bizarre, soot-like coverings on the surface. But the most chilling detail was not visual, it was electromagnetic. The team reported that whenever their boat was directly above the object, their electrical equipment, their satellite phones, their cameras, their lights, failed. They went dead. As soon as they drifted away, the equipment started working again. Rocks, no matter how glacial, do not emit an electromagnetic field strong enough to jam modern electronics. This suggests that whatever lies at the bottom of the Baltic is not a geological formation, is a device, or a wreck. This anomaly forces us to confront a possibility that we have danced around but never fully embraced. We have spoken of lost civilizations, of humans with advanced masonry and mapping skills. But the Baltic anomaly, with its metallic-like appearance, its skid mark, and its electrical interference, suggests something else. It suggests high technology. It suggests that the ancients may not have just been sailors. They may have been pilots, or perhaps they were not human at all. This brings us to the most uncomfortable yet persistent whisper that rises from the ocean depths. If the sea is a graveyard of cities, is it also a hiding place for the others? Every ancient culture, from the Sumerians to the Dogon of Mali, tells the same specific, impossible story about the origins of their knowledge. They do not claim they invented civilization themselves. They do not claim they figured out agriculture, law, and astronomy through trial and error. They claim they were taught, and they claim their teachers came from the sea. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of known civilization, the myths speak of the Apkallu, the seven sages. The most famous of these was Owans. He was described quite literally as a fish man. The ancient historian Berossus wrote that Owans had the body of a fish, but underneath the fish's head was a human head, and beneath the fish's tail were human feet. He would rise from the Persian Gulf every morning to walk among men. He instructed them in constructing cities, founding temples, compiling laws and geometry. He taught them everything that softens the manners of men. And when the sun set, Oannes would dive back into the sea and spend the night in the deep, for he was amphibious. We smile at this image. We call it a primitive metaphor for the bounty of the sea, or a sun god myth. But why is the description so specific? Why the double head? A fish head worn like a helmet? Why the specific detail that he slept in the water? And why do we find this exact same figure on the other side of the ocean? In South America, the legends of Lake Titicaca and the Pacific coast speak of Viracocha, the creator god who emerged from the waters to bring civilization after a great flood. In West Africa, the Dogon tribe speaks of the Nomo, amphibious beings who came from the sky in a great ark, but lived in the water, appearing as half man, half fish creatures, to teach the people the secrets of the stars, specifically the Sirius star system. These are cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, yet they all share the same impossible teacher, a benevolent amphibious humanoid who brings high technology and civil order from the water. If we view these myths through the lens of our sunken reality, a pattern emerges. What if these fishmen were not magical monsters? What if they were the survivors of the aquatic civilization we have been tracking? Imagine a diver wearing an ancient, sophisticated diving suit or a rebreather helmet, emerging from the ocean to greet a primitive, post-cataclysmic tribe. To the simple hunter-gatherer, a man in a wetsuit with a helmet would look exactly like a fishman. He would look like a being with a second skin and a double head. He would retreat to the water at night because that is where his ship, his habitat, or his air supply was located. The myth of Owans may simply be the memory of a contact event. It may be the memory of the Atlanteans, the survivors of the sunken cities, trying to reboot civilization by teaching the scattered survivors of the mainland the basics of their lost science. They were the teachers from the deep, the keepers of the flame, moving between the submerged world and the broken world of the surface. But the ocean is not just a place of history, it is a place of current, ongoing mystery. The Baltic anomaly, with its electrical interference, bridges the gap between the ancient past and the present day. We are told that we have explored space better than we have explored our own oceans. This is a cliché, but it hides a terrifying truth. The ocean is vast enough to hide anything, and it seems to be hiding something active. For centuries, sailors have reported strange lights spinning underwater. Christopher Columbus himself, on his voyage to the Americas, recorded seeing a light like a wax candle moving up and down in the ocean, and later a strange glowing object rising from the sea. In our own modern era, the phenomenon has been given a name: USOs, unidentified submersible objects. In 2019, the world was stunned when leaked footage from the US Navy showed tic-tac shaped objects performing impossible manoeuvres off the coast of California. But the most interesting detail was often missed by the headlines. These objects were not just flying, they were seen diving. They would drop from 80,000 feet to sea level in seconds, and then submerge without a splash, entering the water as effortlessly as a ghost, passing through a wall. The Navy's sonar reportedly tracked them moving underwater at hundreds of knots, speeds that are physically impossible for any known submarine, speeds that would tear a conventional vessel apart due to friction and pressure. Where do they go? Where do they base themselves? If we connect the dots from the ancient fishermen teachers to the flying shields of antiquity to the modern tic-tacs diving into the Pacific, we are left with a startling hypothesis. Perhaps the sunken civilization did not die. Perhaps it merely retreated. Perhaps the cities like Dwarka and Yonaguni were the surface outposts, the public face of a culture that was always amphibious, or at least masters of the deep. When the cataclysm came, when the meteors fell and the ice melted, perhaps they didn't just drown. Perhaps they went down, deeper, into the trenches, into the vast hollow caverns of the crust. Perhaps they are still there. The Baltic anomaly might be a door. The Bermuda Triangle, with its magnetic anomalies and missing ships, might be a ventilation shaft. The bloops and strange ultra-low frequency sounds recorded by Inoue, sounds that mimic biological calls but are far too loud to be whales, might be the machinery of a world operating right beneath our feet. This idea changes the ocean from a passive wilderness into an active, occupied territory. It means that when we stare out at the horizon, we are not looking at emptiness. We are looking at a border between our noisy, surface-dwelling civilization, which has forgotten its past, and a silent, deep-dwelling civilization that has preserved it. They are the watchers in the water. The OANZ figures of today may be the pilots of the USOS, observing us, perhaps waiting for us to grow up, or perhaps waiting for the next cataclysm to reset the board once again. As we drift deeper into this thought, the water around us seems to grow heavier, more pregnant with meaning. We realise that the mud flood we spoke of in our previous journeys, the burial of the cities on land, has a counterpart in the sea. The water flood was the other half of the Great Reset. The earth swallowed the cities of the plains. The ocean swallowed the cities of the coast. It was a simultaneous, coordinated erasure of the past. And while we can dig up the buried buildings in Seattle or Rome, we cannot easily dig up the continental shelf. The evidence there is protected by the most powerful force on Earth, the ocean itself. But there is one more place we must look, one more anomaly that defies the water. We have looked at the ruins on the seabed, but what about the water itself? We are going to turn our attention to the strange, inexplicable chemistry of certain waters, to the polygonal water theories, and to the places where the ocean seems to behave like a living, conscious entity. We are going to the deepest point of all. We are going to the Mariana Trench. But not to look for fish. We are going to look for the sounds. because in the deepest silence of the world, something is screaming. We descend now, leaving the continental shelves and the sunlit zones far behind. We are passing the point of no return, sinking past the abyssal plain, drifting down into the Hadal Zone, the kingdom of Hades. We are approaching the deepest scar on the crust of the planet, the Mariana Trench. It is a place of absolute crushing darkness, a place where the weight of the water is equivalent to having an elephant stand on your thumb. It is the most hostile environment on Earth, more alien to us than the surface of Mars. And yet, the official narrative tells us that it is a quiet, dead place. We are told that life here is sparse, slow and simple. We are told that the silence is absolute, broken only by the settling of silt and the occasional shifting of a tectonic plate. But as we float here, suspended in the void, 7 miles beneath the surface, we find that the silence is a lie. The ocean is not quiet, it is screaming. In the summer of 1997, the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, was listening. They had deployed a vast array of hydrophones across the Pacific, originally designed during the Cold War to track the quiet nuclear heartbeat of Soviet submarines. But the Cold War was over, and the microphones were now tuned to the natural world. They expected to hear whales, underwater volcanoes, and earthquakes. But what they heard on that summer day defied all classification. It was a sound of such immense, terrifying power that it was picked up by sensors located 3,000 miles apart. It originated from a remote point in the South Pacific, west of the southern tip of South America. It rose rapidly in frequency, a distinct organic-sounding wobble that lasted for just over 1 minute. They named it the bloop. The official explanation, released years later after much speculation, was that this sound was the result of a massive ice quake, a large iceberg cracking and carving off the Antarctic shelf. It was a comforting geological answer. It put the monster back in the box. But those who listened to the raw audio, those who studied the bioacoustic signatures of marine life, were not so sure. Ice cracking sounds like a snap, a grind, a sudden release of tension. It is jagged. The bloop was smooth. It had the undulating, frequency-modulated profile of a living core. It sounded like a voice. But for a voice to travel 3,000 miles through the dense medium of water, to be heard louder than the roar of a blue whale, the loudest known animal on Earth, the creature producing it would have to be unimaginably large. Calculations suggested an organism over 250 feet long, dwarfing the blue whale, dwarfing the dinosaurs. Was it a creature? A leviathan surviving in the deep? A remnant of the megafauna that we thought died out millions of years ago? Or was it something else? Was it the sound of a machine? If we return to our hypothesis of the hollow earth or the subterranean civilization, the bloop takes on a different meaning. It could be the sound of a massive ventilation system engaging. It could be the sound of a pressure release valve opening on a city buried in the crust. Or, perhaps most chillingly, it could be a signal, a ping sent out to calibrate the sensors of the watchers in the deep. And the bloop was not alone. There was Julia, a sound recorded in 1999 that sounded like a cooing, mournful human voice, lasting for 15 seconds. There was the train, a sound that resembled the chugging of a massive engine. There was the upsweep, a seasonal sound that has been heard since 1991, peaking in the spring and autumn like a planetary alarm clock. The ocean is filled with these ghosts. We call them anomalies, but perhaps they are simply the ambient noise of a civilization we refuse to see. This concept of the active deep brings us to a geological discovery that fundamentally changes our understanding of the planet's water. We are taught in school that the water cycle is a surface phenomenon, Rain falls, flows into rivers, empties into the ocean, evaporates, and rains again. We are told that the oceans we see are the only oceans there are. But in 2014, scientists analysing a rare diamond spewed up from the mantle found something that should not have been there. They found ringwoodite, a mineral that acts like a sponge for water. Based on the amount of water trapped in this single tiny stone, geologists calculated that the transition zone of the Earth's mantle, the layer of rock deep beneath our feet, holds immense reservoirs of water. In fact, they estimated that there is enough water locked in the rock of the mantle to fill the surface oceans 3 times over. Let that sink in. There is an ocean inside the stone. There is a deep water cycle that connects the surface to the interior. This validates one of the oldest and most persistent myths of humanity, the fountains of the deep. The Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and countless other flood myths speak of the water coming not just from the rain, but from below, from the bursting of the subterranean reservoirs. If this is true, then the Great Reset, the flood that drowned the continental shelves, may not have been caused merely by melting ice. It may have been a geological event where the inner ocean vented, and if there is water down there, vast, warm and protected from the surface radiation, could there be life? Could the hollow earth be less of a cavern and more of a porous, water-saturated network of habitable zones? Perhaps the fishmen Oans and the pilots of the Tic Tacs do not live in the cold pressure of the trench. Perhaps they live through it, using the trenches as highways to the warm inner seas where the water is eternal. But water itself is the final mystery, as we drift in this crushing dark, surrounded by the element that makes up 70% of our planet and 70% of our bodies. We must ask, what is water? We treat it as a dead substance, a simple chemical compound of hydrogen and oxygen. But recent fringe science suggests it is far more. We look at the work of researchers who claim that water has a 4th phase, a gelatinous structured state that forms against hydrophilic surfaces. We look at the controversial experiments suggesting water has memory, that it can retain the energetic imprint of what has been dissolved in it. If water can hold information, then the ocean is not just a bathtub. It is a hard drive. It is a computer. Think of the billions of lives that have ended in the sea. Think of the cities that have dissolved into it. Think of the history that has washed into it for eons. If water holds memory, then the ocean is the collective consciousness of the planet. It is a vast, swirling library of everything that has ever happened. The sounds we hear, the bloop, the whistle, the hum, might not be animals or machines. They might be the playback. They might be the ocean dreaming, replaying the energetic signatures of the titanic events it has witnessed. The psychics and the shamans have always said that water is the conduit to the spirit world. Perhaps they were speaking literal physics. Perhaps the ocean is the medium through which the past interacts with the present. This perspective transforms our descent. We are no longer floating in a void. We are floating in a mind. The pressure around us is not just the weight of water, it is the weight of information. And the ruins we have visited, Yonaguni, Dwarka, Heraklion, are not just stone skeletons. They are the connection points, the terminals where the land mind meets the ocean mind. The ancients understood this. They built their temples on the water's edge, or even in the water, not just for trade, but to tap into this source. They understood that to rule the world, you must be in harmony with the water. We, in our arrogance, have turned our backs on it. We treat the ocean as a dump, a larder, and a highway. We ignore its depth. We ignore its history. And in doing so, we have cut ourselves off from the source of our own origins. We are nearing the bottom now, the Challenger Deep. The silt here has been undisturbed for millions of years, or so we are told. But even here, in the deepest loneliness, we find trash, we find plastic bags, we find the debris of our surface world, drifting down like toxic snow. It is a sad reminder of who we are. But look closer. Beneath the silt, beneath the plastic, the sonar scans show strange angular formations, bridges across the trench, walls that run for miles. Are they geology? Are they the distinct fractured plates of the crust? Or are they the foundations of a bridge that once spanned a canyon that was not underwater? If the earth expands, if the water comes from within, is it possible that the Mariana Trench was once a dry rift valley, a Grand Canyon on a smaller primordial earth? The mind reels at the possibilities. The ocean is a mirror that reflects our ignorance back at us. Every time we think we have mapped it, it reveals a new anomaly. Every time we think we understand life, we find a creature that lives on sulphur and heat in the blackness. Every time we think we know history, we find a city where no city should be. We are travellers in a world we do not own. We are guests in the house of the ocean. As we prepare to ascend, to leave the crushing pressure and the screaming silence behind, we must gather the fragments of our journey. We have seen the steps of Yonaguni. We have seen the statues of Heraklion. We have seen the grid of Pavlopetri. We have seen the gold of Dwarka. We have seen the road of Bimini. We have seen the map of Piri Reis. We have seen the gears of Antikythera. We have seen the basalt logs of Nanmadol. We have seen the disk of the Baltic. And we have heard the voice of the bloop. These are not isolated puzzles. They are pieces of a single picture, a picture of a lost humanity, a humanity that was global, maritime, and wise, a humanity that was destroyed by the very element that gave it life. And as we rise towards the light, towards the surface, where the air is breathable, and the history is safe and dry, we must ask ourselves the final question, the question that will haunt us when we wake. If they were so great, if they were so advanced, if they could map the stars and build mountains, why couldn't they save themselves? And if they couldn't stop the water, can we? The surface is approaching. The blue is turning to turquoise. The light is breaking through. But before we break the surface, before we take that first breath of air, we must make a pact. We must promise not to forget what lies beneath. We must promise to remember that the map is a lie, that the history is a fragment, and that the truth is waiting, silent and patient, in the temples beneath the sea. We break the surface. The light of the sun hits us, sudden and bright, a stark contrast to the eternal, pressure-filled twilight we have left behind. We breathe the air of the present day, the air of the world we know, filled with the sounds of combustion engines, the hum of electricity, and the chatter of a civilization that believes it has conquered the planet. But as we drift here, bobbing on the waves between two worlds, we are changed. We can no longer look at the horizon with the same innocent eyes. We can no longer accept the blue space on the map as mere emptiness. We know now that beneath the hull of our reality lies a shadow reality, a sunken mirror image of human greatness that was smashed and drowned. We have seen the steps of Yonaguni, the golden ruins of Dwarka, the paved roads of Bimini, and the impossible machinery of the Baltic. We have heard the screams of the deep and felt the silence of the drowned libraries. And now, in this final moment of contemplation, we must try to synthesize this journey into a single, coherent understanding. We must answer the question that lingers like the salt on our skin. Why have we forgotten? This collective amnesia is, perhaps, the greatest mystery of all. How could a species lose its own history so completely? How could we forget a global maritime civilization that mapped the poles and built mountains of stone? The answer lies in the nature of trauma. When a grand catastrophe strikes, when the Great Reset occurs, The priority of the survivors is not to write history books, it is to survive. When the water rose, when the sky turned black, when the cities were swallowed, the chain of knowledge was broken. The priests died, the engineers died, the maps were lost. The survivors, huddled on the mountaintops that became the new islands, were reduced to subsistence. They spent generations just trying to stay warm and fed. And as the centuries turned into millennia, the truth of the Golden Age faded into myth. The great ships became the chariots of the gods. The advanced technology became magic. The teachers from the ocean became fishmen. We are a species suffering from PTSD, a species that has repressed the memory of its own near extinction because the truth that our world is fragile and temporary is too terrifying to bear. But the ocean remembers. The ocean does not lie. It preserves the evidence in a cold, high-pressure stasis, waiting for us to be brave enough to look. And what we see when we look is a reflection of our own hubris. We look at our modern coastal cities, New York, Tokyo, London, Shanghai, and we see them as permanent fixtures, monuments to our mastery of nature. But the ruins of Heraklion and Dwarka laugh at this arrogance. They tell us that we are building on the same fragile edges as they did. They tell us that the coastline is not a line drawn in ink. It is a line drawn in sand, and the ocean can erase it whenever it chooses. We are not the masters of this planet. We are tenants living on a lease that can be revoked without warning. The climate change we fear today is perhaps just a small echo, a minor fluctuation compared to the cataclysmic violence that ended the previous age. We are walking in the footsteps of giants, oblivious to the fact that the path leads into the water. This journey also forces us to reconsider the very shape of history. We are taught that time is an arrow, flying straight from the primitive darkness of the cave toward the enlightened brightness of the space age. We believe we are the smartest, most advanced humans to ever walk the earth. But the sunken temples tell us that time is not an arrow. Time is a wheel. It is a cycle. We rise, we build, we reach a zenith of connection and technology, and then the wheel turns. The catastrophe comes. The hard drive is wiped, and we start again, crawling out of the mud, reinventing the wheel, rediscovering the stars, and slowly, painfully rebuilding the world that was lost. The ancients were not primitive. They were just at a different point on the wheel. They were the apex of the previous cycle. We are the apex of this one. And the question that chills the blood is not who were they, but how close are we to the turning of the wheel? The evidence of the Great Reset is now undeniable. We have explored it on the land where the mud flood buried the first floors of our cities, creating a layer of silence and soil that we paved over. And now we have explored it in the sea, where the water flood swallowed the continental shelves, drowning the capitals of the Golden Age. These are not separate mysteries. They are the same event. It was a singular planetary convulsion that reshaped the crust, displaced the oceans, and erased the memory of mankind. The mud and the water are the two blankets that cover the corpse of the old world. And we, the modern humanity, are the orphans who have built our nursery on top of the graveyard, playing with toys we think we invented, unaware that the blueprints are rotting beneath our feet. But there is hope in this realization. By finding these ruins, by listening to the bloop, by mapping the anomalies, we are beginning to remember. We are waking up from the long sleep of the dark ages. We are realizing that we are not alone in time. We are part of a long, unbroken lineage of dreamers and builders who have faced the fury of the earth and survived. The technology of the past, the resonance of the pyramids, the geodesy of the maps, the harmony with the water, is not lost forever. It is waiting to be rediscovered. It is a legacy that has been kept safe for us in the Museum of the Deep. If we can learn from them, if we can understand why they fell, perhaps we can break the cycle. Perhaps we can build a civilization that does not drown. As we stand on the shore of this new understanding, the ocean looks different. It is no longer a barrier, it is a bridge. It is a bridge to our past and a bridge to our future. The waves that lap at our feet are carrying messages from the deep, whispers from the submerged bells of wise, from the towers of Atlantis, from the spirited stones of Nan Madol. They are telling us to look down, to explore, to stop staring at the stars and start staring into the abyss, because the aliens we are looking for are not on Mars. They are us. They are the version of us that was lost, and they are waiting for us to come home. So, traveller, as you return to the dry, solid world of your daily life, carry this silence with you. When you walk through your city, remember the cities that lie beneath the waves. When you turn on a light, remember the wireless power of the pyramids. When you look at a map, remember the lands that are missing. Do not let the noise of the official narrative drown out the quiet truth of the water. The world is deep. The history is vast. And the mystery is not something to be solved. It is something to be experienced. It is a reminder that we are small and the ocean is great, and that in the end, everything returns to the water. Sleep well. Let the sound of the ocean, the real ocean, the deep and dreaming ocean, lull you into the darkness. Let your mind drift down, past the light, past the noise, into the warm, embracing silence of the sunken temples. You are safe here. You are part of the story. And tomorrow, when you wake, the world will be a little more magical, a little more mysterious, and a little more infinite than it was before. Dream of the water, dream of the giants, dream of the world that was. And if you have enjoyed this journey into the deep, if you have felt the pressure of the past and the pull of the mystery, consider joining us again. There are many more ruins to explore, many more maps to unroll, and many more silences to decipher. Your presence here, your willingness to listen and to wonder, is the only thing that keeps these memories alive. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon, but keep your mind in the deep.